Looks like I'm streaming. Wow, alright, cool. Forgive me if I didn't set this up right, but I'm just streaming. I've got a file that I've exported as a 3ds from Chief Architect, and I'm bringing it into Sketchup, and I'm going to just kind of run through some initial parameters in Thea and just see some initial settings that I like to set up, and a few features of Thea. I've had a few people interested in Thea and how I make some of my more realistic renderings in Thea. So anyways, we're going to wait for this import. Part of a live stream is we've got to wait for all these loading things to happen. So this is our Thea tools panel window here, and there's a couple things I'm going to set up, and actually I've already set them up for this scene. Oh, that's not true. Never mind. That's a brand new file. So I'm going to be working on an interior shot. So already I'm going to go ahead and pump these settings up. I'm going to make this ISO setting something like 800. And these are just camera settings. So if you're familiar with photography, maybe these are familiar to you. My shutter speed, my F number is going to be a 4. And we're interrupted by the import. It's going to click anywhere. It's going to give me a spinning wheel for a second as it tries to load this model. Now, Thea materials, even though they're attached to a core material that's imported from Chief and SketchUp recognizes as its materials, Thea has its own material parameters. So even though you can do a render with flat images, which is to say that all you have is a diffuse map or a single texture source, Thea, you can load in additional maps. In fact, there's quite a few settings you can load in with a Thea material. And you can store Thea materials, and you can have them associate with SketchUp materials. So there's some powerful workflow things there. I tend to just run through and set my own materials up as I go because I'm pretty quick at it, and I don't do this often enough to need to automate it. So not a huge margin in these super realistic renderings, but I do get some clients every once in a while, and happy to go through and just set the materials up exactly how I like them. So here we go. We've got our house imported, and I can kind of get in and get to the shot that I'm looking for, which is I just want to see what this kitchen looks like. And this is just for me. This isn't even for my client. I'm just actually really just curious about what this kitchen looks like with a little bit more realistic lighting. So back in my display settings, set my ISO to 800, shutter speed 64. I'm going to set my F number, my f-stop to a 4, and then I think we can pretty much leave it at this. I'm also just going to get into my environment tab, and under IBL, which is image-based lighting, I'm going to illuminate the scene with a spherical backdrop that actually has an illumination key in it, or an alpha channel. So, and that alpha channel is going to give Thea information about where lighting is coming from within the image that we're loading. So I'm going to do this dry field, and we can see dry field has a very a particular sunspot in it, and we're going to see that load up when we start to render. So it's going to load that image up. It's a 16K image, a spherical image. I'm going to check this illumination key under image-based lighting. And then let's pull up my render window. Now you can render by default in the SketchUp window, but I like to render in the Thea window, which means I can shrink this window down, and then we're not processing as many pixels. And you can see a previous render there. So I'm just going to click render, and we're going to see where the scene is already at, not having established any lighting or materials. All we've done is change our basic camera parameters, and we've keyed in a spherical backdrop that has an illumination key. So this will take just a second to kick on and fire up, and we can start to see what the image looks like just straight out of the box without editing much of anything. Okay, and there we go. And you can see just with those basic settings, we've already got what looks to be an overexposed shot. Now, before we get too far into this, I'm going to navigate to this window just so you guys can see what this exterior backdrop is even doing. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn this intensity of that backdrop down. So I can actually, I've got finite control over the intensity of the backdrop. I can turn it up or down. I can turn the camera's settings up or down. You see I turned it down, and we can start to see that backdrop Maybe we'll turn some of the camera settings down even lower. We can probably raise up our shutter. Let's do like 100 on our shutter. There we go, and we can even lower this down a little bit more, maybe like a 600. And there we go, we're starting to see our exterior. And you can also see, let me see, we're gonna rotate this. Now I could just, I could have clicked and dragged and rotated, but I'm gonna key in a number. I'm gonna key in 250. It's gonna rotate that backdrop 250 degrees. And you see here, immediately we start to see the backdrop. That's because the illumination just got rotated with the image itself. So now, when we back up into that kitchen scene, it's not going to be as lit from that one angle, which means we might need to go in and adjust some things if we just wanted to leave this on for like an ambient interior shot. So I could go back and change some of these numbers again. Bring this maybe back up to 800. And maybe I want that shutter speed back down to 64 or so. And that's a relatively well-lit scene. Now let's go and take a look at some of the materials that we can set up here. Let's just look at some of these chairs right here. And you can see they're pretty flat looking right now. I'm going to use Thea's tool, which means I'm clicking on Thea's icon here. And we've got a live render, keep in mind, so we've got a little bit of slowdown. My encoder speed's going to be a little low. When I click and select this, I've got a big preview window of the material. If I double click, it's going to shrink that down. Double click it again, it's going to bring that up again. And so this is a live rendering happening here of that material, which is nickel, and this is named from Chief. So whatever my material name is in Chief, that's going to bring it forward. So if I bring this drop down menu up, we're going to see all the materials from Chief. I could actually go through, and if these are aptly named, I could go through and fix every material as I wanted to, one by one, instead of having to click on the material in the scene. I could just go through and take the time and fix every material. So there's a couple things we can do from here. I like to stay within the presets. As soon as we get into the editor, we're getting into some more advanced things. You can get a lot done just by keeping within the presets, which means that under the default preset section, we've got this little hamburger menu here where we get to select parameters, and we've got some pre-done items here, one of which is metal. So I can choose metal, and we're going to see immediately in the rendering window, we're starting to see metal chairs. And we can also see that in our material preview here, so pretty clever. Now, if I want to get a little bit more advanced with this, I could just crank up roughness, which is going to make that look more like an anodized finished. But that's not perfect. We've still got a lot of sheen to it. We could, by clicking on this image right here, introduce a bitmap image, which is just primarily going to be a black and white image, and edit it that way. I'm actually going to get into our editor. Once we get into our editor and I click on this material, metal layer properties, we're going to get some additional parameters. And this is because we designated this as a metal. Now we see that we have anisotropy as an option. And under anisotropy, I can add in here like a brushed texture and get a really good looking brushed kind of a stainless steel looking metal. And so it's at 0% right now. All I need to do is click on this and slide it over, and we're going to see I'm increasing that anisotropy using the map that I just loaded. So you can get very, very advanced. This is only tip of the iceberg. I can also add in clipping masks. I can add displacement maps. I can add emitter maps to this. I can add any kind of medium or subsurface scattering. The sky is the limit in Thea. It is an absolute professional software. It doesn't get much better than this. So there's a lot to it. There's a lot to learn, but it's also a very powerful software. Something I like to do, particularly on my countertop here, is I want to add a reflections map. And actually, I want to just increase reflections. This is how I'm going to go about this. I'm going to increase reflections, and you see, in our rendering window, we immediately get some really heavy reflections. And then I'm going to click and load a roughness map. And I'm going to go ahead and navigate to my own material files, and we'll get into countertops. And under countertops, I just have some standard bump and roughness maps. And all these are going to do is introduce some kind of like spec into the roughness of this channel. So then I need to click on roughness, drag this slider up, and I'm going to go ahead and drag it up a great ways here. And we're going to see in this, we've got kind of a dispersion in here, right? We've got some refraction going on. There's some specks in here. You're really not going to see the power of this until you do a final render or you get in really, really tight to this countertop. We'll try to see if we can get it into this recording. These recordings get compressed so much that you might not be able to see it. So there's a good chance you won't be able to see that detail that I just did. Now there's a possibility that the map of the diffuse map is a lot larger than the map that I just loaded, which means that we've got a scale issue. And we can edit those scale issues by getting into the editor. And once I click on a channel, say the diffuse channel for instance, it comes up with a bunch of different options, one of which is coordinates. And I could change the scale or offset of those items. Another thing I can do is I can change the color. I can, maybe the brightness of this countertop isn't something that I like, so we can increase the brightness. Maybe we'll kick it up to something like 20. We can even bring down some of like the red intensity or the green intensity in this case. Maybe we want to make this a little less green. Take this down 14 or so. So we've got some finite edits, on the fly edits, we've got saturation edits if we want to, so quite a few things you can do here. Next thing that I want to introduce is we're going to just bring in some lights. I'm going to turn off the render window while we're doing this. And I'm going to introduce our light. So I'm going to get in real tight, and this is typical SketchUp stuff where we get to add a light. We can add an omnidirectional light, we can add an IES light. For this case I'll probably use a point light, which I would call an omnidirectional light. I'm just going to click on it right there, and we can, this works just like SketchUp. We can hit our up arrow and bind this to our Z axis if we wanted to. So there's that light. I mean, I could do another one or I could just copy that. The benefit of copying it is that we can set global parameters for this particular fixture. So same thing, I'm going to use our move in SketchUp. Click on this, hit my control key, now I've got a duplicate. And I could even bind it in this axis so that we're center on this fixture if we want. There we go, just like that. So now we've got these lights, which are only turned up to 8 watts. We'll turn it up to like 100 watts just to check it out. Setting real world parameters helps you set your camera so that everything looks proper, so that everything's dialed in correctly. It makes for more predictable results. So that's a nice thing to note. You can see we've got a bunch of can lights in here. We can set a bunch of these IES lights, same way we would for those point lights. The IES light has a particular profile loaded into it. It's already got its value associated with it. So I'm just going to copy and paste a couple of these. Well, if I can figure out how. There we go. Oh, no. Let's try that one more time. So I do use SketchUp for rendering, as you can see. So it's nice to know a couple different softwares. I use Twinmotion for a little lower level of detail renderings. That's a fantastic software for video walkthroughs. It takes a lot more hardware to do video walkthroughs in Thea, although the results are absolutely spectacular. You can do full virtuals, you can do spherical video renderings in Thea, which is pretty crazy. I personally don't have a render farm, so that's where I'm limited. So we've got these IES lights in here, and let's just take a look at, let's pull an active rendering again and just see what that did to the scene. So this takes a little bit of work. You've got to work through all the materials in the scene. You really got to dial in your lighting to get everything looking exactly how you want it to. Get your sun direction dialed in, get your backdrop dialed in the way you like to. There's some really high level editing capabilities with Thea. Thea will export material and object ID masks, which make it possible to have all materials and all objects in the shot have a pre-done mask for you to select in Photoshop, which means you can edit items on the fly in Photoshop just by selecting those masks, which is fantastic. We've got some elevated things we can do. One is there's a denoise channel, which will get rid of all the fireflies, does it extremely well. And then we've got a diffuse depth, which means that we're going to get more depth and more light traces and bounces out of our diffuse channels and everything in here. So there's a number of parameters we can crank up and really get dialed in. We can see here that right now we don't have anything setting our exposure on an automatic level. But if I click stop, let's see. There is an automatic exposure setting that we can do in post-process. So actually, let's just do a quick bucket render and see what the scene looks like. So I'm going to uncheck interactive. I'm going to get into my settings here. I am going to turn up my diffuse channel. We're going to make this 2. We're going to turn on a bucket render. It's already turned on. Extended tracing is already turned on, and that helps for glass. I do want to make sure that I have a glass material for my exterior. So I'm going to click on this. You can see right here, this isn't a very realistic glass right now. So we're going to change this. We're going to make it a thin glass. And then from there, let's, and another really, really powerful thing about Thea is I'm going to, let's see, what's a good example of this? Let's go ahead and click on this countertop right here. I'm going to select and then reselect our countertop here. This guy right here, and what I'm going to do is I've got this tab right here called Model, and under Model I have beveling and edge ramp. And what this means is I can actually bevel edges on a model that has sharp edges. I can ease those edges, and it even gives me the width in centimeters of that bevel. So all I'm doing is softening all the edges of that countertop, which will make a big difference in our final result. So if you've got an item that looks really jagged or hard-edged and it should be a little bit softened, Thea gives you the capability on the fly. You don't have to go do that in Model. You can do it in rendering, which is awesome, awesome, awesome. Here's my sample rate, just for the sake that we're on a live feed right now. Let's kick that down to 80 or so, and then we can run this. And I think it's going to take us about 2 minutes, so I might just talk through it a little bit. So a bucket render is going to take essentially one quadrant. It's going to split this image into grids. It's going to take one quadrant at a time and render just that quadrant. And it's going to use all your resources on those quadrants, or it'll split the task up. There's a couple different ways you can do hardware distribution. The other thing we didn't click on was Relight. With Relight, you can actually have a fully rendered scene, and then it takes a little bit more processing time, but after the scene's fully rendered, you can go through and change your emitter settings so that you can up the brightness or down the brightness. It's essentially baking this render in so that in post you can relight the scene as needed. So if you wanted to change one of these lights to say a pink light, you could after you've rendered, which is an awesome bit of help there for sometimes you want to change and show a client what maybe different Kelvin light bulbs look like. You can do that with the Relight option. So there we go. It finished in 28 seconds, and we're going to take a look at a couple things here. Let's expand this just a little bit so we can see more of the shot. One of the things I want to change is I'm going to go through into same thing, my display settings, and I'm going to turn on the Intel Denoiser, and we're going to see a little bit of processing happening here. There we go. Look at that. It cleaned up all the fireflies immediately. Really quick. And you can see here, I didn't do a lot to this scene. I haven't set all the materials, obviously. We don't have, chrome materials. We didn't fix this countertop material. We didn't get the sink faucets in there. We did get that anisotropy on these chairs, and not until we turn this into like a 4K rendering are we really going to show that. Same thing, we're not going to see all that spec that I put into the countertop until we pump up the resolution. So this is just kind of a proof rendering. We're just starting to establish our lighting, but you can see it's happening pretty quickly. Our glass here, we need to up our tracing level because it's not tracing the light coming through that glass. It's really hard for Thea to trace light through glass, so you need to essentially increase the sample rate. It's not actually the correct term, but that's essentially, in layman's terms, what we're doing is we're increasing the amount of tracing going through this glass and how that light interacts with this glass. So you saw in the preview, we saw some lighting happening in this glass, but now that we've rendered, we need to increase that tracing rate. But you can see right out of the box, this isn't a lot of fuss. It's very repeatable results. You know, you're in Chief X13, you're using an RTRT, and you get some kind of wacky results sometimes, or they're not exactly repeatable. They're not something you can bank on every time. I can bank on the results from Thea every single time. And the scene will only get more realistic from here. So, good example of the capabilities of Thea. I can go on with the software for hours because there's so many conditions that you might run into where you need a little bit of help in discovering, what Thea can solve for you, because it can really get some things done that you wouldn't think could get done. So you can see this edge is a little bit easy. Let's go ahead and rerun this. It was done so quickly. Let's see what it looks like when we set our camera settings up to like a 2K or even a 4K texture. Let's just do a 3840 resolution, and maybe we'll up our sample rate to 110. So this is going to go from something more like maybe 3 or 4 minutes. Oh, and we wanted to increase our, let's see what our tracing's at. Transparency depth, that's actually pretty high. Our diffuse depth is 2. We'll take it up to 3. Tracing depth is actually pretty high. We could take it down even a notch. So we'll run it again. I'm not exactly sure that I'm streaming right now, by the way. I just clicked on a button in OBS Studio and I think it's working. I don't know if you guys can hear my mic or what. I know that I don't have anybody chimed in watching right now, so this will be something that'll just be posted on my channel, and I may or may not leave it there. We'll just see how successful I am in this scene. So this is essentially warming up the engine. I've got a 14-core machine. It's an old Xeon, so we've got 28 threads going right now, and we've got 4 old graphics cards. We've got 2 1070s GTX and 2 980 Ti's. So those 4 together make for an actually pretty quick machine, believe it or not, in Thea, because Thea utilizes all of that hardware. A lot of other softwares are only capable of a single card, and they might not use the CPU at all. So if you've got a machine that's old but you've got a lot of hardware stuffed into it, Thea can do a fantastic job. It's on par with some of the single RTX cards on some of these single card platforms. Yeah, so we've got a 4K scene here with 110 sample rate, and it's going to be done in 3 minutes. That's pretty quick. Someone posted on one of the Facebook groups for Chief Architect recently, and it was talking about this bucket rendering style, how we used to have to wait for this and we'd see it coming around in this like worm path circle, starting from the center. I actually like it because on an overnight render, if you've got something screwed up in the middle, at least you get to save yourself and start over again and fix it real quick. It's once you get to those outer edges, you find out you got something goofy up there. Oh well, stick it to Photoshop. So here we go. Now we've got this higher resolution texture. We can see here, this is a reflection here. We can see that bump map that I put in here. Excuse me, not a bump map, but a roughness map I put in here. We can see that taking shape. This countertop looks pretty sharp, right? So we can increase that roughness, or we can turn down that gloss, but we are getting that look that I was looking for. And also, as we've got an increased resolution, we can see that softened edge on this countertop. It's not a razor sharp edge. I could soften it even more if I want to, but these are the little details you're not going to get in a Chief Architect. Not without just adding an eased edge profile, which brings forward its own issues. So those are some of the high level edit capabilities of Thea. And I mean, these look pretty good. I'm probably going to increase, just in SketchUp itself, I'm going to use some of its tools to kind of round these chairs out because they don't look all that great. You can see there's some lines in here where this is supposed to be a totally round surface. I could try to fix that in Thea, but for that instance, I would just fix it in SketchUp. So still got an issue with the light here. I think maybe it's that emitter is buried into the bulb, which could be an issue. So just some things to iron out. I think this pretty well demonstrates Thea's initial capabilities. If you've never seen some of my finished edits from Thea, some of them are really indistinguishable from a real photo. So this can get there if I wanted to spend the time on it. This client's not paying for this. This is just for me. I just wanted to see what the lighting looked like in this kitchen. So I'll work on it for a little bit longer and then put it away. Hope you guys enjoyed. I'm going to go ahead and end the feed. Thanks.